My older brother Cameron and I had planned a camping trip along the East Coast. As usual, Cameron handled all the planning, choosing the site and making all the arrangements. I just tagged along. He picked a solid spot. The campsite was remote, requiring a bit of a hike to reach, which meant we had the place to ourselves, or so we thought. The site itself was a bit undefined, with several small clearings that could have served as designated spots. We didn't stress about it and just picked one. At first, everything seemed peaceful. But as we settled in, we started noticing small, abandoned objects scattered around, things like a single trekking pole, an old pair of hiking boots. Strange, considering how far out we were. People don't just leave stuff like that behind in places like this. It was odd, but we shrugged it off and went about our evening. As night fell, we lit a fire and relaxed, chatting about nothing in particular. A couple of hours passed when I happened to glance over Cameron's shoulder and froze. There, deep in the trees, flickered a faint orange glow. I pointed it out, and we both stared. It was another campfire, burning way out in the woods. Given how thick the forest was, it didn't make much sense. There didn't seem to be any clearing over there. Maybe someone just preferred solitude. We didn't dwell on it too much and continued talking until exhaustion hit. After putting out our fire, we crawled into our tents for the night. Sometime later, I woke up. My stomach twisted as I realized why. I had downed too many drinks before bed. Grumbling to myself, I unzipped the tent and wandered a short distance away to take care of business. As I finished, my eyes drifted back to the distant flame, still burning in the woods. That's when I noticed it. A dark figure, standing between me and the flickering light. A jolt of fear shot through me. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a tree or a strangely shaped bush. But as my vision adjusted, more figures began to emerge from the shadows. 10, maybe 15. All of them standing motionless, watching me. A chill ran down my spine. I turned and walked back toward the tent, heart hammering. Should I wake Cameron? Was I just imagining things? But before I could make up my mind, I stole one last glance toward the tree line. The figures had moved. They were closer. I scrambled back to the tent and shook Cameron awake. His groggy confusion turned to alarm as he followed me outside and saw exactly what I saw. His face drained of color. We didn't wait. Without grabbing anything but our car keys and wallets, we bolted. As we ran, neither of us looked back, too terrified of what we might see. The figures never followed. Later, we reported the incident to the police, but they barely took us seriously. A whole group of people lurking in the woods in the dead of night? Yeah, right. They brushed us off. But we couldn't shake the memory of those abandoned objects at the campsite. Had others encountered the same thing? And if they had, why hadn't they reported it? Or worse, what if they never made it back? 2 years ago, in the middle of spring, I took time off work for a solo camping trip. There was a small lake in northern Minnesota that I had visited before with friends and family, but this time, I wanted to go alone. The hike to the campsite took about 2 hours, nothing too difficult, mostly flat terrain. I set up my tent a little ways into the trees so I wouldn't be right on the water's edge, then settled into my chair with a cold beer, soaking in the peaceful sounds of the lake and the birds. The sun dipped below the horizon faster than I expected, and soon, darkness settled over the forest. Normally, I found nights in the wilderness comforting. There's something liberating about being completely alone in nature. But that night felt different. A strange unease crept over me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the dark tree line. I wasn't the paranoid type, but something about that night put me on edge. Still, every time I looked, I saw nothing. Maybe I was just overthinking. I focused on the fire, trying to relax. Hours passed, and just as I was beginning to let my guard down, crack. A sharp, unmistakable snap of a branch breaking under heavy weight. The sound came from directly in front of me, deep in the trees where my firelight couldn't reach. My entire body tensed. It had been loud, too loud to be a squirrel or a raccoon. I swallowed hard. Was it a large animal? A deer, maybe? Or was it something else? Slowly, I reached for my bear spray and called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Silence. Not even the sound of rustling leaves or shifting undergrowth. The forest had gone completely still. I stayed frozen, staring into the black void beyond my fire. Eventually, I remembered the flashlight in my pack. I dug it out, flicked it on, and aimed it toward the trees. Nothing. The underbrush was undisturbed. No movement. No sign that anyone, or anything, had been there. Still, the paranoia didn't fade. I tossed more wood onto the fire, making sure it burned bright. Every few minutes, I flicked my flashlight back on, sweeping the trees. Then, on one of those sweeps, I saw him. At the farthest edge of the light, half hidden in the darkness, stood a man. Tall. Freakishly tall. The second the light hit him, he stepped back, vanishing into the black. My breath caught in my throat. My mind raced. How long had he been standing there? How long had he been watching me? The branch snap. It had to have been him. Panic surged through me. I moved fast, breaking down my tent and shoving my belongings into my backpack. I wasn't staying to find out what he wanted. I took off in the opposite direction of where I'd last seen him, back toward my car. At first I ran. But after a while, when I felt like I had put enough distance between us, I slowed to a quick walk, keeping my flashlight on its dimmest setting. As I walked, questions churned in my head. Why hadn't he approached me? Why just stand there? Watch me? Then it hit me. Maybe he was waiting. Maybe he had been trying to see if I had a weapon. Or maybe he had been waiting for me to fall asleep. I made it back to my car without seeing him again. But ever since that night, every time I go camping, I can't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, is watching. And this time, I might not see them before they see me. Back in 2014, I took a 4-day weekend off work and decided to go camping. The area I lived in had plenty of small campgrounds tucked away in the woods, and I found a quiet, isolated one about 45 minutes from town. It was a simple setup, just a small dirt parking lot with 3 designated sites nearby. No one else was there when I arrived, so I picked the far left spot and got to work setting up my tent. The short walk from my truck to the site was only about 5 minutes, but the thick trees made it feel much deeper into the forest. For the first hour, I just sat around, taking in the silence. Then boredom hit. I figured there might be a hiking trail somewhere nearby, so I wandered back toward the entrance to check. That's when I saw it. Another car had pulled up beside mine, an old, beat-up red Toyota. Rust covered the body, dents and scratches everywhere. But the thing that stood out the most? No license plates. Front or back. A weird feeling crawled up my spine, but I brushed it off. Someone else must have come to camp at one of the other sites. No big deal. I turned back toward my campsite, sat on a log, and tried to relax. 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see a man walking down the narrow path toward my site. No backpack. No gear. Just him. His clothes were ragged, holes and stains covering his brown jacket. His beard and hair looked greasy and unkempt. Despite his disheveled appearance, he was staring straight at me, like he had come here for a reason. "You wouldn't happen to be able to help me with something real quick, would you?" he asked. I hesitated. But not wanting to be rude, I shrugged. Sure. What do you need?" He smiled, but it felt off. "Not just yet," he said. "I'll come back for you when I'm ready." With that, he turned and walked back toward the parking lot. I sat there confused. What was that about? If he needed help, Why come all the way to my campsite just to tell me he'd be back later? I figured he was unpacking his car first or something, so I waited. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Then an hour. Nothing. By the time the sun set, I had forgotten about him entirely. I had my fire going, was making dinner, and was starting to feel more at ease. Then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the darkness behind me. I turned, but at first I saw nothing. The woods were too dark. But I could hear him, his boots crunching against the gravel path. Then, like something stepping out of a nightmare, he emerged into the glow of my campfire. That same man? He stopped just at the edge of the light, his face unreadable. "You ready?" he asked. I blinked. "For what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave another strange smile, like he was trying to put me at ease. But the longer I looked at him, the more I realized how unnatural it felt, too forced, too eager. "It'll only take a minute," he finally said. "You're not busy, right?" The way he said it, like he was trying to make it sound casual. But his body language told a different story. He was too still. Too expectant. Something was wrong. Against my better judgment, I hesitantly stood up. My brain screamed at me to say no, to refuse, but my awkwardness got the better of me. Before I knew it, I was following him into the darkness. We walked deeper into the woods. With every step, the firelight behind me faded, and the shadows swallowed us whole. That's when I realized he wasn't carrying a flashlight. Nothing. Just walking confidently into the pitch black, like he knew exactly where he was going. A sick feeling twisted in my gut. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "So, what did you need help with?" I asked, my voice unsteady. For a second he slowed, like he was about to answer. Then, he just kept walking. No reply. That was it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stop. I slowed my pace, putting a little distance between us. Then he turned. The firelight barely touched his face now, but I could see his smile had vanished. He was frowning. He knew. His hand moved toward his jacket, and in that split second, I saw the handle of something sticking out from inside. I ran. I didn't think, I just turned and sprinted into the trees. I could hear him behind me, his heavy footsteps crashing against the forest floor. He was chasing me. I ran blindly, branches slapping against my arms, my legs burning. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound of his footsteps faded. I kept running until I reached my truck, my lungs on fire. My hands fumbled to unlock the door, but I managed to throw myself inside and start the engine. When the police arrived, the red Toyota was gone. So was the man. I gave them every detail I could, his appearance, his car, even the missing plates. But there wasn't enough information to track him down. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I had kept following him into the dark. But I do know one thing, he didn't need help. He was hunting.